And lake master mapping on Hummingbird, I talk about it all the time. It's a big, big deal. It allows me to break down a body of water faster than I ever could before because I see the whole layout of the lake right in front of me just by scrolling my graph around. I saw 3 areas on the graph. So it was a long, big old cove that went back. There was 3 areas in there that are protected by a north wind that kind of came to a cove scenario, but inside the cove. They were all the areas. I had past experience here, but I also knew before I came here before, I had no experience. They're the areas I went to because on a map, looking at it, that's where I think I should spend my time at because of all the time doing this. They're the areas I cheat on. So going back into these little pockets is what it was. Every single one on the map had a little ditch line coming in. And the ditch lines are really important because bass during the pre-spawn actually use them little ditch lines for highways, more or less, to come in and head in. So in my practice, it was really clear to me. We had a really big warming trend actually coming into the practice. And I knew a lot of fish were going to push up. I didn't know if they'd get on the beds or not, but I knew they were going to take them ditches, them highways leading in. So they were my key areas. It just so happened that day 1 of the tournament, we had a cold front come in, which seems to always happen during tournament scenarios. So what was happening was I'd fish in there, and I'd fish my way in pretty much every day. So in the actual tournament, by tournament time, them fish have already worked their way all the way back to them coves, them real tight areas, right before they're getting ready to spawn off, basically the last drop before it got to the flat. Day 1 of the tournament, I caught all them fish fishing right up tight. That same night, that Saturday night, that cold front still continued. So by day 2 of that tournament, I started on the same area that I was in on Saturday in the morning on Sunday, and I pull in there. I could not get a bite shallow because that cold weather finally set in. It actually pushed them fish back a little bit. And the reason I figured this out was because when I was fishing up on them shallow ditches, I wasn't getting them. I literally turned around and I threw a cast out behind me on the break that was going out in the contour, basically the outside of it all. And I actually hooked a 6.5 pounder and I lost the fish. So that kind of clued me in saying, like, even though I lost it, I was a little upset, but I was like, man, that could be a hint what's going on. So all them shallow fish that pushed up, that's the biggest thing too in the springtime. You have to be willing to adjust because, let's face it, the springtime, the weather's up and down like crazy. So that being said, I did know from a lot of experience that even though you had a bite one way, it could definitely change the next day. And that's what happened to me. But losing that big fish on the outside allowed me to make the adjustment. So what I did was I backed out of the ditches, and now I started fishing the corners. And I started fishing the corners, and all the fish that were up the day before, they all moved out, and I absolutely whacked them. Now, let's talk about the lipless. So this is the lipless bait that I threw. It's a Nomax. It's called the Swimtrex Max. The 66 is a 3/4. We redesigned the lipless bait. Basically, we wanted more vibration, more or less. So we took this lipless bait, we did some modifications to it, and we basically made the most vibrating lipless bait on the market. Actually, it feels like a chatterbait, that's why I said that. The big deal with this, it was a lot different this week. So jumping into a kayak, I just can't run wherever I want to run, like if I'm in a bass boat like normal. So with the kayak, I really had to make sure that I was in an area that I could basically try to win the tournament out of. So I practiced different this week. Typically in a bass boat, once I get on some kind of pattern that I know I'm going to be doing, a lot of them bites that I get, I'll shake off. But in this practice, I actually hooked a ton of them fish because I needed to know that I'm in a kayak, I can't move that much. I needed the areas that I knew I could focus on, spend my full 8 hours in. So knowing the pre-spawn, knowing how the fish should line up, where they should set up, allowed me to break the lake down a lot better. Like I said, being out of a kayak, I needed areas like that. Being with a lipless, super duper important. Now, one thing that I always kind of heard, like I said, new to kayak fishing, one thing I always heard was, man, a lot of times you're in a kayak, you got less room, you want to think about a shorter rod. That wasn't the case this week for me. I almost feel like it's opposite. So when you're in a kayak, you're that high off of the water. When you're in a bass boat, you're that high off of water. So in a bass boat, you actually have a lot more leverage, but in a kayak, you don't have that leverage. In the very first couple of days of practice, I threw a 7'2" medium heavy Shimano Zodius glass rod. It wasn't enough. So in the tournament, I adjusted. I went to a 7'6". That 7'6" actually gave me a lot more leverage because I was throwing that trap in shallow grass, ripping it, getting a lot of reaction out of these fish. But going to that longer rod gave me the ability to rip that trap, keep it clean, and catch a lot more fish.